As of mid-2012, 75% of the sexually active women in the developing world who aren't trying to get pregnant over the next 2 years are already using contraceptives. 218 million unintended pregnancies are thus prevented annually, averting 138 million abortions, 25 million miscarriages, and 118,000 mothers dead of complications from childbirth or backroom abortions. Family planning in developing countries prevents 55 million unintended births. Since we currently add 80 million people annually, a million more of us every 4.5 days, without contraception reaching those women, our ranks would expand by a million more hungry humans every 2.5 days. Women actually have 80 million unintended pregnancies, half, 40 million, gay abortions. Another 10 million miscarry. 30 million have babies, 6 million of whom die before their first birthday. If all the contraceptive needs in the developing world were met, not all those 30 million unplanned births would be avoided. Contraceptives are sometimes forgotten and sometimes fail. But at minimum, there would be 21 million fewer births. The number of abortions would also drop from 40 million to around 14 million. More than half the abortions that poor women get, 22 million, are unsafe. That number would drop to 7 million or less, and some 50,000 women's lives would be saved. Currently, 4 billion each year is spent on contraceptive care in the developing world. 8.1 billion per year could fully meet the needs for modern contraception in the developing world. Nearly a billion of the current amount comes from countries such as the UK, the Netherlands, and Germany. The United States is the biggest donor. In 2009, 98% of the UNFPA's foundation funding came from 4 American foundations, and 81% of that was from just one, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Some scientists wrote in 2011 that in the first 5 months of this year, world population grew by enough to equal all the AIDS deaths since the epidemic began 30 years ago. Most conversations about population growth use the UN's medium estimate of 9.2 billion people, which was where population was supposed to level off by 2050. Now, they say it will exceed 10 billion by 2100. High and low estimates for 2100 are equally possible, depending on how serious the world gets about family planning. The difference between them is just half a child per woman. Half a child less, you get a far more sustainable figure of 6.2 billion. Half a child more, you get 15.8 billion. Mass starvation was what Henrik, a scientist, began to fear back in 1966. He concluded that by the 1970s, famines would kill hundreds of millions of people, unless dramatic programs to increase food production stretched the Earth's carrying capacity. But these programs, he said, will only provide a state of execution unless they are accompanied by determined and successful efforts at population control. Even as their book was published, Norman Borlaug's miracle hybrids were coming to first harvest in India and Pakistan, and the famines the Erics predicted for the 1970s were averted. In subsequent decades, pro-growth economists made Paul Ehrlich and his forebear Thomas Robert Malthus their favorite punching bags, never missing a chance to ridicule them. Crop ecologists expect grain harvests to drop 10% for each 1 degree Celsius rise in average temperatures, And with the world now added beyond 2 degrees Celsius at present rates of emissions, population will be up, food production down, and dikes may have to protect much of the world's rice production. Even at a 0.8 degrees Celsius increase, China barely missed losing its winter wet crop in 2011. Humanity may be just one disease away from a catastrophe that could shake civilization's foundations. The chance of an epidemic like Ebola wiping us out is far less likely than pathogens blown around the world collapsing our food supply. Paul Eric, that lives in the US, has no doubt that the most overpopulated country on earth is his own. He says that there is no condom for consumption. In the last 50 years, world population more than doubled, but world economic growth increased sevenfold. With lack and contraception, world population might stabilize, but consumption grows on almost exponentially as the more people have, the more they want. The next 2 billion people we add will do a lot more damage than the last 2 billion, says Eric. Those of us already alive have already plucked the lowest hanging resources, like wringing oil from rocks. From now on, acquiring things we use will be much harder, involving much more energy and leaving much bigger messes in our wake. The day after the 2008 US presidential election, Paul and Ann Eric wrote a letter entreating Barack Obama to put birds on a par with dads. The following year, the president signed a bill to make healthcare and health insurance available to all, and a year later announced that as of 2013, health insurance in America must cover birth control for women with no copay. As a result, millions of women who paid up to $50 a month for birth control suddenly found themselves not having to decide between dinner and Depo-Provera. In a country where nearly half of all pregnancies are unintended, there was finally some reason to feel helpful. A former astrophysicist compiled a fantastic data set on food production worldwide that goes down to the country level for the entire globe. It vastly exceeds the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's own database. Scientists using that database are asking and trying to answer the most serious question in history: how can we humans go on? In 2008, a paper published in the journal Nature identified 9 planetary boundaries beyond which the world would enter a phase shift that could prove cataclysmic for humanity. The 9 boundaries were climate change, biodiversity loss, disruption of global nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, ozone depletion, ocean acidification, freshwater use, changes in land use, chemical pollution, and atmospheric particulates. For 3 categories, the boundaries they proposed had already been surpassed. Those were climate change, nitrogen, and biodiversity. In 1995, a book titled "How Many People Can the Earth Support" was published. That book offered no single numerical answer to that question, except to say that none exists because it begs so many other questions. Questions such as, at what level of material well-being and with what degree of distribution among the world's people, with what technology, in what physical environment, and with what kind of governments, with what risk, robustness, or stability, that is, support people for how long, and with what values? The answer to this question isn't very complex, although an infinite, awesome ecology underlies it. keep everything in a reasonable balance, chemistry, variety, and numbers, and there is hope for our children and for the spawn of all the birds and butterflies to continue together. Based on data I have gathered in 2021, unintended pregnancies in the world between 2015 and 2018 averaged 121 million a year, while world population forecast for 2100 ranges from 6 to 16 billion.